Namaste. I'm Kash and welcome back to Akashic Song. So I was getting ready to do my I for the ABCs of Witchcraft, and the interesting thing is, before I even had to think about what I would want to talk about, like what I represented, I realized that we were approaching the time of Lunasa, and Lunasa is the first harvest season beginning on the wheel of the year. And Lunasa happens to be the time when I did my initiation. So I tend to celebrate Lunasa pretty fervently every year because it was when I got my witchy name. It was when I completed my year in a day. So Lunasa is a big staple in my practice. So today we're going to talk about my initiation process. And as I've said before, my path is pretty Wiccan, with a lot of Hindu, yoga, Buddhist influences. I've mentioned before that I work with Lakshmi, and I work with Bast, and I'm pretty very, very goddess oriented. So my initiation came out of a year and a day long study that I did into Wicca. So I'll go back a little bit. I've been practicing the craft since I was about 20 years old. So it's been about 20 years, a little bit more. Like 21 years that I've been practicing the craft. And when I first started out, I started as really self-taught. I mean, I'm still self-taught, but really instinctive and intuition-led. And if I felt like burning a red candle because I was feeling like I wanted to welcome love into my life, that's what I would do. If I was feeling, you know, kind of down and I wanted to like inspire myself, or like I was getting ready to write something, I would burn a yellow candle. So I started with candle magic, and those were the first books on the craft that I read. But before that, I was just kind of being led intuitively, going towards what felt real and true and right for me. And I was raised in a Christian household. My dad is a minister in the New Thought movement. So if you don't know what New Thought is, it's really influenced by Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind, New Thought Christianity. So kind of the premise is that God indwells in each person, each being carries the spark of the divine within them. But they call it God. So each person carries the spark of God within them. There's no God out here, over there. God is within you. So I grew up having this philosophy that there's not something over there that I'm supposed to be getting to, pleasing, appeasing, any of that, that it's within me. And when I make contact with the God within myself, that I would do the things that are in balance and in harmony with all of the world around me, because I can only be moving from a place of wholeness, if that's where I'm coming from. So all of the paths that I set out on after I moved out from my parents, I initially studied Zen Buddhism, and then there was something in that to me that was kind of missing the romance. It's very don't do anything, just sit. Well, how long should I sit for? Until you're done sitting. Don't think about anything, just be with what is. And it's a great way to disconnect from external stimuli that can be sending you on a journey. But if you're like me and you're very devotional, then there's a little something that feels like it's missing. So I took a lot of really great information and study and experience from Zen Buddhism, but I moved into Mahayana Buddhism, which is called the Great Vehicle. And it teaches balance and harmony and the eightfold path of getting free of desire. And so I walked that path for a while, and it felt really good, and I learned so much about the Buddhist journey. And right about this time, probably I had been practicing for about 8 years, something like that, 8.5, less than 8 years, 7.5 years, and I had my spontaneous third eye awakening experience. I talked about that in a previous video where I was in a horrible, horrific car accident, and my third eye popped open, and I just began to see the world in Technicolor, and I realized that there were some things going on that I hadn't really dove deep enough into, and surface kind of living was not going to do it for me. And I was just going down this path, and I had to get a lot of healing because I shattered my knee and had to have surgery. And while I was at home recouping, Hurricane Katrina happened, and that's when I had this huge burst in like mediumship, souls that had passed on coming to me, and I was holding discourse. I'd be looking at one face and it would turn into another face, and it was really kind of intense. And I've always been a person who had some psychic abilities. Clairaudience was the biggest for me, that I heard things. But I never had mediumship, and so when that started to come in, it was a little bit like, whoa, this is a lot. And so I tried to make space for it, and I shared what I could with the people who were connected to those folks. And then I started to feel this gnawing sensation that something was really wrong. And I went to this bookstore that's no longer open in LA. It's called the Bodhi Tree bookstore. And I just started praying, and mind you, I'm walking a Buddhist path, and I had just started doing yoga, but I never stopped doing candle magic. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I'm telling this story, that all through these journeys, these different paths that I was experimenting with, I never stopped doing magic. I never stopped reading books on magic. I never stopped watching movies about magic. There was something that just kind of was pulling me towards the magical. And so it was kind of a running theme in the background that I would be doing this kind of stuff, and then reading books on yoga and living a very, like, you know, Buddhist life and going to chant and all of that. But then you know, I would buy a crystal and light some incense and light a candle and do a channeling session. So those things were in the background, but I told myself that I wasn't a witch, that I was walking a Buddhist path. I just had this flavor to it. So while I was in the Bodhi tree, I just started praying to my guides, and I said, hey, I don't really know what I'm here to get, but you show me why you brought me here. And the book that jumped out at me was called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. I've mentioned it 100 times. And so I read that book. I went home and I set this space for awakening. I said, I'm not leaving this room until I've read this entire book. I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting from here, but I'm doing it. And I read the entire book, and from cover to cover. And when I was done, I felt like something transformative had happened inside me. Something had completely just turned over, and I felt like I left my body a little. Like I was out of the body, but I was in my spirit. I could feel everything and everyone. And I just continued to do these really deep meditative practices and the mantras in the book. And over the course of the next 6 months, my Kundalini rose from doing all of this yoga and the pranayama breathing techniques and the meditation, and I was still channeling, and so my Kundalini rose. And then I was having these really intense experiences that I could not make sense of in anything that I had read. And so I just kind of started to pray about, if I don't find a way to get back in my body, sorry, excuse my dog, Lexi, shh. I'm in a new location. I'm trying to film in the dining room. And they are wrestling on the sofa, so forgive the noise. It's really hot here today, so I'm having some iced green tea, so forgive me. Okay, so all of this phenomena was coming at me, and I was just feeling like I can't make sense of what I'm experiencing in anything that I've read, and I keep going to these books to try to figure out why I feel like I'm not here anymore. And it was really scary to feel like I could just step out of my body at any time, but that's how I started to feel, like I was leaving my life. And what actually brought me back into the body was the craft. So I remember sitting on my bed, and I was crying because that was the only way I could really feel attached to my body. I was crying. And I went inside and I said, I need to feel my body again. I need to be here. And I heard something say, are you sure you're ready to go back into the world? And I've debated whether my answer was right. But in that moment I said, yes, I think I have to. And I got up, I lit some candles, I set some incense, I sat down at my altar, and I got ready to meditate, but instead what I said was, show me the way back to my body. And I heard, the earth has much to teach you. Meet the Divine Mother. And so I got my shoes and I went for a walk, and I just started walking and making contact with nature again and getting out of my head and into, like, I mean, I had always like had this connection with nature, but almost in this other way of like, oh, that's pretty. Those flowers smell nice. That tree is really tall and beautiful. But in this time in my life, I started walking and putting my hands on the leaves, touching the tree and connecting, walking with my feet bare on the grass and sitting on the earth. And I just started to slowly come into harmony with being on this earth and being made of earth. And that was my journey to Wicca. So I continued to practice witchcraft, and I was watching, you know how they like do, what is it, syndication. So like I was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer on syndication. And this was now, so fast forward, some years have gone by that I've continued to practice and work with deity and work with my guides, and got way into like starseed, like other planetary interstellar beings. And I got to about, maybe this was 2013? Yes, 2013. Trying to keep my timeline here. So 2013, sometime in 2013, I was rewatching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And it was around about that time where they were in college, and Willow, who was the witch on the show, I'm sure you all have seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you haven't, I don't know what you're doing with your life. go watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer right now. So they're in college, and the show had always been like really fantastical and kind of like, you know, out there with all the demons and stuff. And I had watched Charmed and all of that kind of stuff, right? But something about watching Buffy, and they were in college, and Willow went to a Wicca group, and they were kind of like connecting and like getting ready to call circle or something, and they sat down, or they were sitting, and then they started talking about a bake sale or something, and she was talking about doing real magic, and when she went to meet back up with Buffy, she was like, hey, how was your Wicca group? And Willow said, a whole bunch of wanna blessed bees. She's like, oh, so no real witches in the Wicca group. And it was the first time that I mean, probably not the first, but it was the time when I actually heard the word Wicca, and it stuck out to me. I was like, Wicca? What is that? I'm sure I've read it before, but right now it's not coming to me. What is Wicca? And I had watched videos before on YouTube where people were talking about Wicca, and Tiptoe Chick was really big on YouTube, and I had watched a bunch of her videos, but I went back and I started watching it again, and I don't know why, but something in it was really connecting with me, and I was thinking back to like, oh, this is exactly what happened to me. I went so far out that the only way back in was through my body, was through nature, was through connecting with the divine through nature. That's what Wicca is. And at first I was kind of like, but this also seems like the religion of European white people because of Gerald Gardner and like, you know, misinformation. But so I decided that I was going to look a little bit more into it, and I ended up, you know, coming to find out, obviously, that Gardner populated Wicca. He never even called it Wicca, but the concepts were all taken from older ancient traditions and shamanic traditions, and you know, that craft is so old. It became repopularized by an Englishman. So I went out and I got this book called Wicca, Year and a Day by Timothy Roderick. And I started going through it, and the way it's laid out, there's all these, I'm getting to my initiation, I promise. This is all part of the story. So there's all of these, it tells you a little bit about Wicca, just in case you want to do, I mean, it tells you a lot about Wicca, but the way the book is broken up was actually really interesting. They tell you, or he tells you, what you're going to need for, you know, days 1 through 30, the different herbs that you're going to need, if there's any candles that you're going to need, incenses that you're going to make, and each day is just a short exercise, and then there's resting days or contemplation days. So I do recommend doing something like this if you're curious about Wicca and you want to kind of go through a practicum, because I'm not in a Wicca coven. I am in a coven of solitaries, but we are not a Wicca coven. So, I'm the only Wiccan in the group. So I got a book, I started going through this, and I've read some that I like even better now. They're not year and a days, they're just like, it's an entire book on Wicca. But doing these as exercises actually really helped me to identify what this practice could be, and how to take the eclecticness and make it my own. How to be an eclectic Wiccan in a way that really works for me. I was so connected to the Hindu pantheon and the yogic journey, and being able to take some of that and some of Buddhism and some of, you know, fairycraft and some of, you know, shamanism, and I wouldn't say I use Vodun, but I do work I've worked with some of the Orishas before, so taking some of Yoruba or Ifa and bringing it all together and forming my own Wicca practice that took it out of this realm of this is the thing that Europeans do, and actually Wicca is just a beautiful earth-based path that anyone can do in any religion, in any, I won't say any religion, that's not what I meant to say, but if you have any spiritual leanings, you can add in some of the beauty that is Wicca, or you can walk the full path as a Wiccan witch, which is what I'm doing. So after I did this year and a day study, it was getting on towards, I didn't start it right at, you know, the turn of the year. So when I finished, I was approaching Lunasa. And I knew that after Lunasa, or I had decided by the end of this that I did want to do an initiation ritual. And I had read about initiations in other books, but one in particular that stood out for me was Book of Shadows by Phyllis Curott. And Phyllis Curott is a talented, lovely witch. She started her own tradition called the Tradition of Ara, and it combines shamanism with Wicca and witchcraft and the goddess mysteries. And the Book of Shadows that she wrote, it's told like a story, and it follows her over a year and a day process while she's joining this coven. She starts as someone who knows nothing about witchcraft and then ends up becoming a part of this coven and getting initiated by the end of it. But it's telling a whole story along the way. So it's not just, and it's told through the seasons as well. So it's not just like fiction, it's actually her lived story. Everyone's names are changed, but it reads like a story, like a fiction piece that at the end of it, the heroine becomes initiated. I'm probably not doing it justice, but I will tell you that I loved that book. I loved reading it. I felt like I was really in the story and I was a part of this coven and watching what was going on and all of the different storylines that were happening, and then she does an initiation. So I felt like I wanted to do an initiation, and she was trying to figure out her name. And the name that came to her in vision. So I kind of did something very similarly. At the time I was getting acupuncture for some wrist issues, and I knew my year and a day was ending and I wanted to do my initiation, and I didn't want to just speak some words to the goddess and say, hey, I've been doing all of this other stuff all this time, but now I'm actually gonna focus on Wicca and I'm going to let this be the religion for me, and blah, blah, blah. Like, I didn't want to just do that. I wanted to actually feel that I was being chosen for something, if that makes sense, because I'm not in a coven, and I don't believe that it takes a witch to make another witch. I personally don't believe that. I know that there are plenty of people who are British traditional witches that believe that only a witch can initiate another witch. I said, hey, I've always been raised that the goddess lives within me, so I'm just going to ask the goddess to initiate me. That just makes the most sense to me. So I was getting acupuncture and I went into a meditation, and they were playing music that was very easy to go into a journeying experience. So I did. It was very quiet in there, and so I just kind of let myself kind of start getting on the rhythm of the music they were playing and going to my own journeying, and I cast a circle while I was lying there, because I totally believe that you don't have to grab a broom and clean a room and waft and walk and wand and all these things. You can do magic where you sit right now. Those things do help, but you can also, I could be sitting right here and just cast in my mind and do work. I fully believe that. So I cast circle while I was lying there, and I didn't call for any specific goddess. I just started talking to the primordial she. And I do have a meditative place that I go to that's kind of like a meadow when I go and hang out with the fair folk. And so I went to that place and I told the fair folk what I wanted, that I wanted to be initiated as a Wiccan, and I wanted a goddess to speak my name and to choose me and to recognize this journey that I had been on, not just this year in the day, but this journey that I had been on my entire life, to figure out a path that I could walk that would keep me grounded and centered, but also able to be open to these higher frequencies without feeling my kundalini is out of control and I'm just gonna step out of my body. And this felt like a path that would allow me to stay grounded while open. And I wanted a goddess, a deity, a spark of the divine primordial she, if you will, an archetype to recognize the path that I had been on my entire life and finally coming home, and to choose me and name me. And Isis had already given me the name Akasha years before that, 3 to be exact at this point, or 4, because we're now in 2014 at this time, right, when I did my initiation. So I knew the beginning of my name was Akasha, but I wanted to add the Wiccan name to it. So while I'm doing this meditation and I'm talking with the Fae, and they said there is a lake that I go to while I'm there. Oh, I feel like I'm telling so much. There's a lake that I go to. And so I went there. And a lot of times I'll put my feet in there, or I'll put my hands in there, or I'll look at my reflection there. And so I put my hands in there. And I just started to talk to the goddess. And I said, primordial she, if you will recognize my journey, if you will support me on this path, is there a goddess who will speak my name and initiate me into Wicca, into the beginning of my Wicca journey? And I heard Vesta. And I was like, huh? I've never heard of her. I had, but only as an R&B singer in the 80s. I was like, Vesta, okay. And I just wait, and I continued to listen, so I thought, you know, sometimes you never know. So I just kept listening. And again, Vesta, Vesta. And she kind of just started chanting it, Vesta, Vesta. And I was like, okay, Vesta. So when I went through the path of closing or opening my circle and coming back out, and I went home and I just started Googling Goddess Vesta, and all of this stuff came up about this Roman goddess who is associated with the sacred flame and with hearth magic. And at first I was very like, this has nothing to do with my path. I did not have a hearth. I was single, but I wanted to be married. I wanted to be in a relationship, and I wanted to have children. And she was a goddess that chose sovereignty and said, I don't want to be, you know, mated to another god type. I want to be on my own and to hold my own sovereignty. And in Roman mythology, there were, not just mythology, but in real life at this time, she had attendants called the Vestal Virgins. And the Vestal Virgins were like chosen at 6 years old, and they were trained how to tend this flame, and they had to learn a lot of different things about women's mysteries and divination and other things. And they were priestesses, and they were not allowed to marry or mate with a man until they were, I think it was 30 years old. I think it was 30. No, I think it was 30. Yeah, I feel like they had to be priestesses for, there was a set amount of time. And I was like, well, I'm already past that. I want to get married. I want to have kids. This doesn't really seem right for me. So I just kind of let it settle in my system while I was finishing finishing this book. I was kind of at the end of it. And I started designing what my initiation would be and looking up other sources, and something in me just kept pulling this Vesta. And I was like, what does she want from me? I don't know how we're aligned. I'm an air sign. You know, I'm not really that big on fire. I mean, I like candles, you know. But, so I just kept moving, and this kept happening in the background. Things related to fire and my housemates kept throwing these bonfires. And so I'm sitting at the bonfire, and it was as if writing was happening in the fire. And I felt like she was calling me. And I was like, okay, there's something that this spirit, entity, lady wants to do with me, through me, help me to find. And I'm not going to be silly enough to ignore that call. So on Lunasa, as a part of my ritual to recognize the day, I did my initiation. I won't read that here because it's very, very private and it's in my book of shadows, but I did my solitary initiation, and I called in Vesta and I made an offering to her, and I asked for her support and, you know, if we could walk this journey together. And I had a really, really beautiful initiation experience. Yes, I did it skyclad, which skyclad is naked. I did do it skyclad because I wanted to honor the tradition of presenting yourself to the spirit with perfect love and perfect trust, and no fear of the body, and being willing to show up in your full innocence. And I did that. And I'll show you, this is a picture that I keep on my altar. This is Vesta. She's the goddess of the sacred flame. And I do, she specifically said, do not worship me. That's not why I'm here. So I don't worship her. But I do put offerings to the sacred flame itself. That's what she's holding in her cauldron, the flame. So I do make offerings to the flame. I do talk with her every day and spend time at my altar just kind of calling in the sovereignty. And it's funny how I couldn't really make sense of exactly why she was choosing me at the time. But now in hindsight, being initiated in 2015, so much of my life has become about choosing sovereignty. When I got married, I had a hearth. Stop it, Lexi. I had a hearth for the first time that I actually dressed as our Sabbath hearth, and all of the Sabbats were recognized there. And a hearth can be any place you set up an altar space. It doesn't have to just be your fireplace. I'm becoming so much more aligned with the fairy kingdom, specifically the dragons, as a result of this. And I went back through my history and I realized I've always been a fire witch. I've always been a fire witch. My favorite thing to do when I came home from a long day of work was to put on pajamas and turn off the lights and light candles and chill in my room with like natural lighting. It is still, there's not a day goes by that my candles are not lit on my altar, and I never run out of candles. It was the first magic I ever did. So I share that to say I was going about my journey, doing what I thought I was, you know, doing, and just being led intuitively. And the funny thing is that my initiation brought me full circle to who I had always been. And I didn't have to make a choice. I didn't have to decide, okay, well, am I Buddhist, or am I Hindu, or am I just a yogi, or am I, you know, is there still a little Christianity in there because, you know, Jesus is pretty cool. Why do I have to choose between God and Goddess? You know, all of that stuff, you know, my initiation just brought me full circle to like, this is who I am, this is who I was meant to be, this is who I've always been. And, you know, do I doubt myself sometimes? Sure. But whenever I think back to that moment where I chose a path, committed to it, went through an initiation, and have been walking that path since, no matter what comes in and out, my path is very eclectic, means so much to me as a Gemini that flits from thing to thing, to have that grounding that I know that Vesta has my back, and that no matter what else is going on in my life, I am a priestess of the sacred flame. I am an oracle, a channeler, a spirit medium, a tarot reader, and a witch and a Wiccan. And it helps to know that I am devoted to the goddess in every single way. I'm not cut off from divine masculinity, but I know that what has been placed on my spirit to do in this lifetime requires me to be more devoted to the divine feminine. And so I walk that path bravely and courageously, and I make mistakes, but the thing that always brings me back is I know I am sovereign, and I know that I was placed here for a purpose, and I know that I'm a witch. And no matter what else happens going forward, there will always be that part of me that is inextricably linked to the history of witches on this planet who left a trail of bread crumbs sprinkled in all of these different places for those of us who have been here before and needed to be reminded of why we're here again. So that was a very long video. If you made it to the end, thank you for staying with me, but I really do feel like this was one of the pivotal, inaugural moments in my life, choosing Wicca and being initiated as a solitary. And she chose my name. Violet Willow Rose. But I do just use the Violet Ray as a shorter thing to say, so I will call myself Akasha Violet Ray when I'm in circle, but the whole name she gave me was Violet Willow Rose. So thank you for joining me and hanging out with me, and I'm really gonna try to stay with a Sunday weekly schedule. It may change from Sundays, but it's Monday now that I'm filming this. But I am trying to make some shifts in my channel and my content and, you know, the way that I'm doing this work, and so some things have been in flux. But thank you so much for joining me, for staying with me, and if you have anything you'd love me to cover, I'd be happy to try to do a viewer request if there's something you want to know or anything about my path that piques your interest. I'm going to be doing more fairy videos for sure. And if you have not subscribed, why not hang out with me? We can talk about all kinds of things witchy here. And bless you on your journey. And may we all meet in the Summerlands. Namaste, blessed be, as I am as you are.